Welcome to the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand, a podcast for leading financial professionals, or rainmakers, and their teams that offer support for securing a successful future. From marketing help to staffing structure, listen and subscribe for actionable insights from advisors and skilled professionals alike.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this week's coffee break. I know we still got people trickling in here, but it was great to see so many of you last week in Clearwater at the team retreat. In fact, a lot of discussions I know that I personally had were on today's topic, so we know it's very timely. Today, we're going to be discussing ways to improve your email marketing efforts in 2025. And for that, we have our guest barista today, my cohort, Carrie Chadoff, Vice President of Marketing at C2P and head of our marketing agency. Thank you for joining us today, Carrie.
Thanks. And I agree, very timely topic given our conversations with so many advisors last week, and really something that we focus on as part of our agency deliverables.
Yeah. And for those of you on and listening, if you have an email marketing strategy or at least any kind of communications program, that it's really got several different facets. You've got client communications, prospect emails, follow-up from events or things you're doing, lead nurturing. But Carrie, I know from our conversations you and I have had and the ones that we had down in Clearwater, I know a lot of advisors are looking to leverage the email marketing for their prospecting efforts. So more on the latter of what I mentioned, the lead nurturing side. And so I figured let's start there today. So with the email marketing strategy in place, or again, many of you may not have a documented strategy, but it is something I would encourage to map out how you want to be using this because it'll help with based on our discussion today. Advisors wanting to use the email marketing to follow up with the leads they have in various stages. So without getting into like maybe specific examples yet, because I know we're going to be doing that later, can you explain why emails are a good way to target various leads that come in from different sources in your funnel and why it's important to do, even if the prospect maybe isn't as far down the line as someone else? So throughout the whole marketing to sales funnel.
Let me start off by saying, if you don't have a lead nurturing program, don't feel bad, because according to a recent statistic that I saw from Acton, which is a email solution that is well regarded in the industry, they say 65% of marketers say they don't have a lead nurturing strategy in place. So that means 2/3 don't. Now, this isn't specifically financial advisors, this is across, but certainly I would suspect that holds pretty true in our industry also. So let's start with the desire to communicate with your clients. And oftentimes I speak with many of our advisors and they say, our difference is how we service our clients. What better way to show a lead and a prospect that we will communicate with you, we understand your needs, than start doing that right when they start getting into what we'll call the funnel. The funnel I'm meaning is that at the top, they've interacted with you in some way. They've given you some type of information for you to start communicating with them. If they start seeing communications from you, whether that's weekly, biweekly, or monthly, or even quarterly, at least they're like, wow, you know what? It's been 2 years, it's been a year, or it's been 6 months. I'm pretty impressed that you keep following up, opposed to other advisors I work with or downloaded information, and I've never heard of them. So a lot of times your prospects aren't quite ready to move forward all the way to become a client on day one. So this is a way to differentiate yourself. It's a way to establish that you're going to communicate, but it's also a way to leverage your marketing. And what I mean by that is you spent a lot of money, time, effort in developing leads. Now let's just take an example that you ran a Facebook display campaign, you ran some type of gated content on your website, and gated content simply means someone needs to provide you with information in exchange for you to provide them with information. So it's gated, meaning they have to give you their email, phone number, et cetera. Then they get this wonderful white paper, they get invited to a webinar, record a webinar, and now you spend a lot of money doing that. But don't just celebrate of saying, I've got 2 right fit calls, I created 1 client. How about the other 38 or 40 or 50 individuals that participated or download that didn't quite result in a right fit call at that time? Those individuals are so ripe for you to develop a relationship with. And that's one of the reasons that you want to continue to nurture at each stage, especially at the top of the funnel. So that's partly why you need a nurture campaign, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you mentioned how to create that too. I know my advice and I know what we do is build all that at once too. If you're building an ebook on a specific topic or you have a webinar, building out what that content will be in that email nurture as you're building it so that all of the content is cohesive and it's a good user experience from their end as well. That way, it also makes your life easier as you're trying to create it versus going back and doing it after the fact.
Yeah, Matt, when any of our advisors are running let's pretend a webinar, you want to have an email that is triggered immediately when somebody registers. You want to have emails ready that is a reminder 24 hours in advance. You should have an email ready the day of to remind somebody. You should have an email, thank you for attending, or thank you for not attending. Not thanking for not attending, but recognize they didn't attend. And then follow up with some of that information and follow up again that we hope that you found the recording or the actual webinar of value. So all of those should be established, whether you're doing a webinar or even doing something live, even in a FIA program. FIA programs are wonderful, but not 100% of the individuals that either register attend, and certainly not 100% of people that attend result into a right fit call or a client. So what are you doing with all those other things? The other thing I want to mention is if you're using Facebook, which is a wonderful vehicle and channel to drive leads, when you have a prospect that clicks and registers for your event or download, that same prospect, we'll call him prospect, that same prospect is now flagged as a converter on financial service information. And what does that mean? It means when the financial advisor down the street in your same trading geography or same target audience is targeting a similar customer or prospect, that same individual also be served because Facebook wants to serve individuals that are going to be more likely to convert. And a conversion in this case, according to Facebook, would be a registration landing on a confirmation page. So another reason you want to do a nurture campaign, if you remember, I said 2/3 of, in general, companies don't have nurture campaigns. It is another way for you to stand out when somebody may be collecting information from a variety of advisors.
And going back to the point you had before that too, because I know we've mentioned our statistics before over at JL Smith. When you mentioned the non-attendees, I know you're joking, thank you for not attending, but we've actually seen we get just as many right fit calls booked from those that don't attend our webinars than those that do, because maybe they had something pop up. They had something for their kids or their grandkids or work popped up, but they still want their question answered or they still want to discuss that. That's why it is, I'll stress the importance of what Carrie mentioned of having, don't just do one standard follow-up, customize that for whether they attended or did not attend.
But in fact, Matt, a lot of times our agency advisors tell me, we'll run an advertising campaign to draw someone to a webinar. And I've heard more than once, that's interesting because we've also sent an email to our prospect list and we're actually getting more or a high number of individuals attending this webinar opposed to the paid media. That certainly would make sense, right? Because someone has already trusted you to some extent and already exchanged information, and now you're tailoring something to them. Opposed to someone sees a blind ad, they've never heard of your company, and you've asked them to invest 45 minutes of their time. So again, think about where people are. At the top of the funnel, they may have said, just giving you some information, but they've engaged with you. Don't lose that valuable interaction and think about where they're going to lead down to the journey. So don't just think the only way I'm going to communicate with my prospects are through digital ads, but those emails are actually more effective or just as effective as if running an ad, and they're a lot less expensive to do.
Yeah, and that's why it helps to map out all the different touch points that your prospect might have to make sure you're looking at that through their eyes and not yours on this side. So Carrie, that's the first step, is just making sure they have the email nurturing built out. Then you want to target the different people in that pipeline, like we mentioned. So it's recommend having something is better than nothing, but as much as you can, you want to tailor your messaging and your communication depending on who they are, where they are in the pipeline, what they want to hear. What are some ways to go about tailoring the email nurturing in an efficient way?
Yeah. Again, something is better than nothing. Some of you may be using Excel spreadsheet. I certainly would encourage you to use some type of CRM tool. But understand, collect as much information you know about these individuals. How did they come to you? Did they come to you from a Social Security guide? Did they come to you about women in transition? Did they come to you about education? What was the topic? Or was it just retirement planning? Not just, but it was a retirement planning. Something triggered them. So try to develop channels or nurture communications around that topic. Don't throw everybody into a one size fits all. So if I've expressed some interest about what do I do about required minimum distributions, and the next communication you send to me is on Social Security, I, as a consumer, may question what's the connection there. So think about individual channels, individual nurturing campaigns. It can be based on age. It can be based on industry. It can be based on issues and solutions. The more you can do that, the more effective your communications will be. So I would certainly start off with that in terms of understand your client and keeping them separate. And I certainly understand there's only so many nurture campaigns you're going to talk about with required minimum distributions. But at a certain point, you may say, look, I only have so much to talk about on this topic, but now I want to talk about holistic planning, the bucket plan and holistic planning. That's awesome, but make sure you incorporate the Social Security or required minimum distribution aspect into that email. So you could have the same email in terms of the bucket plan or holistic planning, but make sure you really tailor it. And that can simply be a tailoring of a sentence or two at the end, or even the introduction. I know we've recently talked about Social Security. How that plays into the larger planning process is done. So think about how you tailor the message. It doesn't mean you have to have entirely separate emails, but it does mean that a best practice is that you should be tailoring that email. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think another point to that is tailoring the call to action as well. Because depending on where they are, if you get to the point where you now have email nurturing for someone that is already in your process, they're going through the bucket plan process, your call to action might be for additional content or value add things through there. Versus if they're more towards the top of the funnel, your call to action might be to book a right fit call. So it's tailoring the content, but also the call to action from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is you can also divide your customer base or prospect base into where are they? So have they been attended via a webinar? They've interacted with you, and now you're trying to get them to the right fit call, or did they conduct a right fit call and they haven't necessarily taken that next step to become a client? So very different communications, and I think that you can probably be, well, I'll say more aggressive, a little bit more direct. The further they are down the funnel is pushing for appointments. But if they've only downloaded a guide, certainly you can always have a call to action. We'll talk about that. Always want to have a strong call to action, but that call to action may not be talk to me today about how you can transfer all of your assets over and how we can begin a holistic bucket plan today. So they may not be quite ready, to court them a little bit longer. So think about the stage and where you've last interacted with them and personalize that. So that's a good point, Matt.
Yeah. And those that might be a client on one side of your business. And that's why I know, Carrie, you mentioned speaking about being a holistic advisor, the holistic financial plan and the 5 pillars and all that, having nurture sequences for that, because that can illustrate the importance of the bigger picture there. Because I know many of you have clients that maybe are just on the Medicare side or they're just on the tax side, and you're trying to cross-sell them into the other side of having a full holistic plan. So in that case, like they're a client, but they're still a prospect. And so making sure that's just another funnel. And it can get overwhelming, but that's why we're having discussions like today of how to make this easier.
But even to that point, Matt, acknowledge they're a client. As a client who leverages our services on the tax side of things, we want to make sure that you understand the total picture that we can bring in your financials. So don't, again, even though you're prospecting per se, acknowledge as much information and personalize it as much as you can. We'll talk a little about that in potential executions and A/B testing.
Yeah. Yeah. With that, so our marketing team, including us, have been to a number of conferences and webinars, keeping up on the latest trends and best practices, things like that, so we can bring these back to the group. What are some useful tips on that execution side that our team has learned and can be applied to email marketing?
We have an infinity number of things you can test. But what I wanted, before we even talk about some of those, the key is what works for you. What works in one market may not work in another market. What works for your positioning of your firm may not work for another. So the key is to test. And what we call that is A/B testing at the highest level. Simply mean if your database is large enough, split it into two equal sizes and mail one execution to one group and mail another execution to another group. And what I mean by execution, there's a lot of things you can test. So think about an email. The very first thing is the subject line. So perhaps you want to test that subject line. Different ideas could be, do you want to lead with a solution-oriented, or do you want to lead with a problem-oriented headline? So one could be potentially, are you prepared for retirement? Or learn that's certainly an issue or a problem statement, or learn how holistic planning could boost your retirement plan. At the end of the day, they're both going to talk about retirement planning, but one talks a little bit more about the concern about retirement planning. The other talks about, we've already introduced part of our solution. Which one will perform better? I couldn't tell you. I could guess, but that's for you to identify. So think about it at the very high level, what's going on in the subject line. Because if people don't open it, then all of the copy inside is obviously not going to benefit you. Another opportunity is if you have a video, again, we're strictly talking about subject line. If you have a video, test the word video actually in the subject line. Different studies have shown that people actually like watching videos more. And if they know there's a video included in the email, that will drive your open rates also. You can also think about subject lines in terms of, do you want to state it as a question or a statement? Matt, I know you came across Guru Insider, which is a communication conference that we interact with. The word most as the first word in a subject line increases open rates by 24%. And they did that in a December test. So think about keywords that might spur things. Even in blogs, and I know we're talking about emails, sometimes you said 5 tips to improve XYZ. So people like those numbers. So again, that's just strictly the subject line in terms of what you can test. Now, I'll pause there, Matt, to see if you have anything else.
Because I was going to bring up too, just so everyone's aware of the importance of testing subject lines, because it might sound silly, hey, I just need to get an email out, shoot this out, but think of it like your own sales process. It's one sale at a time. The subject line is what you need to sell them on to open the email, because it doesn't matter how great your content is in the email or on your blog if they don't open it. And so testing those subject lines to improve your open rates is that first hurdle. Then you're getting them in the door.
Yeah, exactly. So again, another option is test kind of the FOMO aspect, fear of missing out. And how do you incorporate that into your subject line? And is a negative tone sometimes increases an open rate. Don't be sitting on the side. Don't miss out on a lucrative retirement and all of that. We'll talk about all of this and certainly anything you do. Now, reiterate, anything you do, make sure your individual compliance team approves it. We're not trying to scare tactics. We're not trying to make any promissory thing, but make sure all of this is approved. And a great way of doing it, as Matt said, when you're planning your efforts or you're planning that channel, send all of your communications at once to your compliance team so they can look at it holistically and see how things build on each other. Now you've got the email that just said, all right, now, Terry, you've thrown out a lot of things in terms of opening it. So now let's pretend that you get to a point where you're like, I'm pretty happy with my open rates. And I have that direction. There's lots of things you can test inside. Again, I already mentioned video versus non-video. Little things that you may dismiss is, do you want to use a photo in your email or perhaps an illustration? And you may go, really, does it make a difference? Potentially it could, depending on what you're talking about. I continue to challenge you to do that. I already referenced the importance of personalization in your content. Start off by addressing someone by the name, include their company that they work at, include knowing that you are 5 to 10 years out from retirement. The more you can personalize, the more it's going to resonate and it's going to feel less as a mass email. There's fear of that. There's concern, not necessarily fear. I just make sure that your content, your data is up to date. There's nothing worse than, and I still get it, I get emails now, ask me about my old employer and actually a software that they didn't even use when I was there. I continue to get emails, I'm sure we all do. Make sure that if you're including someone's company name, their name, or that they've been at a company for over 20 years, that information is right.
And Carrie, I'm going to sidebar real quick just for 1 second. We got a question in the chat. What has been the most effective way to grow an email list with the right prospects?
I think there's quite a few ways. One of the most effective way that I've seen in terms of the quickest is really offering some type of guide on a Facebook campaign and make it gated. There's something on Facebook, and I believe we've talked about, called instant campaigns. And instant campaigns actually allow a user to click a button and say download, and it pre-fills their first name, last name, I think email, phone number, because Facebook already has that on you, right? And you have the opportunity to say, you can update that as a user, or you just click confirm. Once you've hit that confirm button, you automatically get that download. Now, why is that a good way? First of all, it's a low involvement activity for a prospect to say, I'm downloading. I'm not committing an hour to go to Matt's webinar across town. I'm not going to call in. I'm just giving him really public information that Facebook already knows about. I'm not asking him his total assets or anything like that. That's a real good way. Now, I want to tell you that those instant campaigns often don't lead to immediate right fit calls. And I don't want anyone to say, I ran this, I got 60, 70. In some cases, we've gotten 200 off of campaigns. I'll talk about that in a moment. Those don't necessarily lead immediately to right fit calls, but what they do is they certainly increase your population. And if you're purchasing a Facebook campaign properly, then your demographics or firmographics would be appropriate. So you're buying it based on age, income level, geography, whatnot. One of the best things, not only guys, but we've been testing running some campaigns where we're offering a chapter or two of a book, whether that's a bucket plan book and offering it electronically, or other books that you may have authored. Certainly is a wonderful opportunity to give them a little bit of a taste.
Yeah, and I guess I'll echo that, Carrie, with some of those lower cost digital ads. It's nice too, because Joe, you mentioned the right prospects. There's so many criteria you can use with a Facebook ad, LinkedIn ads, things like that, nothing can necessarily guarantee they're like the perfect fit for you when they're coming in. But the way that you can use those criteria filters in a Facebook ad, like Carrie mentioned, can make sure that everyone that's coming through at a relatively low cost per click, make sure you're getting the right people into your funnel. Carrie, we had a couple more pop in. Good questions, so we'll make sure we get to as many as we can. Can you discuss how you think about unsubscribed lists specifically, and if we should be concerned about leads who have been captured from webinars or Facebook into the CRM? Then later we launch a nurture email campaign and invite them to other nurture webinars, but those same leads now unsubscribe, sometimes in bulk. How do you manage that? Should we be worried about that?
I'm glad of the question, because you have to absolutely 100% honor the unsubscribe. And it makes it challenging. I know we may not have time, but there certainly are a lot of platforms out there. And certainly if you are using FMG, Broadridge, Snappy Kraken, they have email programs. And when someone unsubscribes, they won't allow you to resend any emails. That's important for a couple of reasons. One, certainly it's a bad user experience. If you've ever tried to unsubscribe and someone keeps sending you the emails, you're like, stop, now I'm going to put you as junk. If they put you in junk, now that hurts your potential deliverability of all of your emails, especially if you're sending it from your own server. And when I say your server, from your own Outlook. So think about it. If you're sending Outlook emails from your office to a bunch of people that are unsubscribing, eventually Outlook's going to penalize and saying, you're starting to send spam. We're not going to allow you to have as high of deliverability, which is why you really want to use a third-party platform, because you're not necessarily hurting their thing. The second thing is you can incur heavy fines by continuing to send emails to people that have opted out, whether it's through your individual email or opted out on a national database. So make sure you're really following it. I think it's okay if it really talks about metrics and reporting. So you want to understand who's opting out. And if you're getting a lot of opt-outs, then I have to challenge, what are you saying and what is your communication? But if you're getting opt-outs here and there, that's okay. Don't waste your time and accept, thank you. Yeah, they probably weren't going to result into anyone materially. As important as the opt-outs are, making sure you're looking at email responses of out-of-office emails. And when do you ever look at out-of-office emails? Because in that information, oftentimes they're going to tell you, I'm no longer at this company. Here's another person. They may say, if an email is bounced, okay, and bounce, we'll say a hard bounce, meaning it can't be delivered. look at that, because if they're a client of yours, now all of a sudden you know that their email changed. So please look at the responses you're getting. So actually, I think opting out isn't the worst thing, but better yet, use a third party. And there's lots of third parties out there, again, whether you use an FMG, Snappy Kraken, Broadridge, other people, Constant Contact, MailChimp, Zoho, and we certainly, and more. As you get a little bit more upscale in terms of more funnels that you want to do, certainly there are opportunities like a HubSpot, Active Campaign, Acton are all names that I'm pretty familiar with. So hopefully I answered the question about the concerns or how to treat opt-outs. And I certainly now expanded that to saying it's not a bad thing, but make sure you're looking at all of your data.
And I'm glad you touched on that too, Carrie, of the not always a bad thing. If they're not interested in all, a little bit of turnover is not a bad thing on the list. I guess the one thing I will add, I know the question was specifically to prospects, but I would encourage everyone to keep an eye on the unsubscribes for any client lists, because sometimes that could be a red flag, obviously, that something's coming where it's time to pick up the phone and see what's going on there. And so I know we mentioned at the retreat last week, we follow EOS. So we have quote unquote people headlines and everything. So we make sure that we bring those up if we're getting an unsubscribe to make sure that we're addressing any potential issues as well. All right, Carrie, we are up on it. I know we've got a few more questions in here, and we had a few we were going to get to that I think we will gladly have you back on and continue this topic for another coffee break. And also, if you have questions on this, because obviously there are a lot coming through here, please shoot those over to us. You don't have to wait for those. We want to make sure we get your questions answered. So even if we ran out of time today, the few we have in here, we'll make sure we capture and get back to everybody so that we can get you the answer you're looking for, especially as a lot of you are doing that planning for next year of what does your content look like? What does your budget look like? Who is handling this for you? So please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone from our team. Reach out to Carrie and his team. They'll be happy to have that conversation of how we can help. So Carrie, thank you very much for your thought leadership and tips and advice today.
And everyone have a great day, and thank you for participating.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Don't miss next week's coffee break, our final one for 2024. Going next year, we got a fun topic. We covered a lot last week, but we're going to be talking about the latest evolutions of AI in marketing and what to be aware of. Jason is going to be your host. I promise it'll be the real Jason and not our AI Jason we've used in some of those emails. And Dave will be on as the guest next week. So don't want to miss that. Great topic and our final one for 2024. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by C2P, an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Never miss an episode by subscribing now to discover new resources and strategies. Visit c2penterprises.com to learn how we can help scale and secure your business. At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.